Welcome to this presentation about the development of our 2D platformer Marvin the Mushroom. On the screen you can see each of the team members as well as their roles and responsibilities. Billy was our chief programmer, Fran was our primary level designer, Lewis was in charge of sound design and music, Xanthi was in charge of environmental art and tile maps, Tia was responsible for character art and animations, and I was in charge of team leadership and production. Once given the initial brief, which stated that we had to have two mechanics in the game, one to get over a gap and another to get over a wall, the designers had a brainstorming session to come up with as many fun and interesting ways for a player to overcome these obstacles that we could think of. Some of the initial ideas we came up with were giving the player the ability to shrink and grow on command, characterising the player as a frog who could leap over gaps or use its long sticky tongue for movement, giving the player a grappling hook to let them zip to different parts of the map, or even telekinetic abilities that would allow the player to manipulate the very environment around them. After a lot of deliberation, we decided to go for a pair of mechanics that would work well in tandem with each other, as well as solving their respective obstacles. The first mechanic was a bomb jump. This is where the player can throw a little circular projectile a few feet away from them and, if timed properly, can detonate the bomb to launch themselves upwards over high obstacles such as the wall on this level. We also liked how this mechanic translated well as a way to attack enemies once those were added. For our second mechanic, we chose a gliding ability, which allows the player to slow their descent and have control over the drift, which means the player essentially has a controllable parachute, which works very well with the verticality that they can get with the bomb jump. The combination of these two mechanics means that the player has a high degree of control when traversing the levels and hopefully enjoys the process of mastering where and when to place their bombs. Now that we had two strong mechanics in place, we had to decide how we were going to contextualize them with each other in a way that made sense, but also within a fun and vibrant theme. We ended up theming the game around the titular mushroom character, Marvin. Not only did we think that Marvin would be an excellent protagonist for the cutesy 32-bit pixel art design we'd chosen, but we were also inspired by the fascinating natural features of mushrooms themselves. We took inspiration from the broad cap of the parasol mushroom for Marvin's glide ability, and for the bombs, we took inspiration from the explosive spore release of the puffball mushroom. With our theming and aesthetics decided, it was now time to work closely with our artistic collaborators to make sure that the right kind of assets were created for the game. We started out by providing some reference images for our environmental artist for the kind of style of background images and tile maps that we wanted. We also provided the character artist with some rough sketches of the kind of characters we wanted. After this, we consulted the artist to establish a colour palette that everything made would be drawn from. We settled on a gloomy fantasy forest aesthetic to match the natural earthy colours of mushrooms, with lots of greens and browns and greys. Marvin's colouring is purposely slightly brighter than his surroundings to make it seem as if he's a bit out of place and is not suited to the scary forest he now finds himself in. We were almost ready to begin putting everything together. The last thing we needed was a narrative wrapper and a source of threat for the player. Sticking with the forest aesthetic, we decided to base the plot around our little mushroom, Marvin, getting lost in the woods and needing to find his way through the increasingly spooky levels whilst avoiding the creepy crawlies so that he can return triumphant to his family. We designed these enemies based upon the creatures you might find in a forest, with each one presenting a unique challenge. The spiky beetle can be approached from the sides but not the top, the flying beetle is a large hazard that must be avoided, and the blowfly can be touched but constantly emits channels of wind that blow the player around. Given that we were a team of 6 people spread across 2 different courses, setting up efficient communication channels was vital. For general questions and correspondence, we used Microsoft Teams with bespoke sections for each discipline. For project planning and ideation, we used Padlet, creating a number of lists to track everything from meeting records to project stretch goals to reference images. For project file access and version control, we used Microsoft OneDrive, again separating the files up to maintain project hygiene and ease of access. The benefit of using OneDrive in this way was that everyone on the team was able to pull their created assets in one location. Lastly, for our scheduling and deadline needs, we used the Gantt chart feature on ClickUp software. This software was very helpful for checking if the project was on track, for seeing if certain sections would take longer than expected, and for assigning individual tasks to team members in the wider context of the whole project. Soon, our first prototype was ready and we were able to see the first draft of the mechanics and visuals in action. We had other people play the game and we got a lot of useful feedback to work on. For starters, the player character seemed to slide around too much when moving, and the speed of his movement also seemed a little too quick. Secondly, when gliding, the player sprite would judder around far too much and the controls were erratic. Despite these teething issues though, the one thing that received very positive feedback was the bomb jump. Our testers loved spamming bombs at their feet to see how far they could launch themselves, watching Marvin fly across the screen if they got the angle just right. The only recommendation here was that it would be nice to have some visual feedback for aiming. We took the feedback we got from our playtesters and made sure to keep this in mind when designing our third level. We wanted to make the most out of the limited amount of space that we had, and so we designed a winding path that loops around on itself and has multiple mini-puzzle sections. The aim here was to position our enemies and obstacles in a manner which would force the player to use their glide and bomb abilities in complementary ways to finish the level, which I'd like to think we managed. Overall, we were very pleased with how the game turned out, and especially with the positive feedback we've received about our responsive and intuitive mechanics. If we had more time to improve the game, we would have added more particle effects, smoother character animations, and maybe even more diegetic sounds, such as water drops for the cave ambience. Anyway, that was a brief overview of our development process. We hope you enjoy Marvin's little adventure.